Thanks, Andrea. Appreciate it. One of the things that we see across the province is variability in feed supply. You go to southern Alberta right now, and you've got areas where there's a dramatic loss or shortage of feed, and they're looking for alternatives. In this area, it's not so bad. You go further north, you get into some situations where you have feed that's been left over from last year, hay that's 2 years old going into winter. They've either combined some of their crops in the spring, baled up crops that they couldn't combine this spring, and they got a straw grain combination that they're going to be feeding this fall. So that's where I'm going to be heading through a lot of this is, okay, what's going on? Where do we get started? How do we evaluate our feed supply? You need to do feed testing. What are your requirements? What types of feed should be fed first? Use of non-traditional feedstuffs, byproducts, 2-year-old hay, spring thrashed products, ration management, and comparing supplement programs. So, what do we need? What's critical for success? You need to know how many cows you're going to be feeding this winter, how many bales of hay or tons of silage, bushels of grain, bales of straw. What do you have available for the winter feeding program? And of course, your feed quality. Without these three things, that's odd. Google says you can't get there from here. And that's exactly right. If you don't have the cornerstones and the base of what you're going to be needing for doing a proper feeding program, it's about as effective as pushing a wagon up the hill with a rope. So, feed testing, it's important. For baled forage and silages, green feeds, round bale hay, or round bale silage, hays and straws, you need to use a forage probe. These are some of the ones that are available on the market right now. The ones with the screw type on the outside of the coring tip, you can hook those up to an electric drill, and you can do 20-30 core samples in no time flat. I still have this style of a machine. Works great with the hip. You can push it in, no problem in dry hay. Word of warning, if you're going to use that type of an implement on high moisture bale silage, after every core you need to clean out that tube. Otherwise, you're going to be taking it back to the vise and using a 3/8 rod and a 5-pound sledgehammer to clean that material out. It packs in that tight. The one thing I have troubles with is I don't have enough energy or enough weight to go ahead and push that silage probe into a pit that's 12 feet deep. So it's very difficult to get a good quality sample using that type of a tool or trying to sample the pit when it's still sealed and working your way down. So my suggestion is, when you go ahead and you look at your sampling procedures, core sampling, you want to have 20 cores per sample. So if you've got 100 bales sitting down in a row from one field, count off 5 bales, take a core. Move down another 5 bales, take a second core. And that composite sample at the end of the day, you send that away to the lab. For the bales, you want to take the samples between the twines, not from the flat side of the bale, so that you're going across the layers of bale, and you get a good sample. For pit or piled silage, my suggestion is, if you're doing a good job of chopping, packing, sealing, have a 5-gallon pail with a lid at the pit site where they're unloading. And every load or every second or third load, take one handful, throw it into the pail, close the lid so you don't lose moisture. At the end of the day, mix up that material, take enough out for about half a bread bag full, squeeze the air out of it, seal it, and then throw it in the freezer. Submit the sample on a Monday or a Tuesday of the week to the lab so it doesn't sit in a warm environment over the weekend at some depot, and they can do the analysis on it. If you've got the pit open already, use a series of samples from the face of the pit in either the M or the W shapes that you're going up and down, side to side through that pit to get a representative sample. Grains or pellets, It's no different than what they do at the elevator. Take a sample out of each load and submit. And that's especially important for screening products, byproduct feeds, stuff that could have a large amount of variability in it. So what do you test for? The main nutrients that should be in every test for forages: moisture, protein. The two fibers, acid detergent fiber is what they use for establishing the maturity of the sample and the energy content. Neutral detergent fiber is used for estimating what is the limit, how much of this feed will a cow eat. So if you get beyond 1.2% neutral detergent fiber, the rumen is full, the cow will quit eating. Neutral detergent fiber is one of the most difficult parts to digest in the ration. So if you have a higher neutral NDF value, say example, you're feeding a high straw ration and you're exceeding that 1.2%, what can happen is you might have 2 or 3 pounds of fiber left in the rumen from yesterday or the day before, and it's occupying space. So their feed intake will go down because they're full. Calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, sodium, that's the base of what you need for a good feed analysis. And to, like as was mentioned, I use a nutritionist and get my rations done by them. That's your minimum. If you want to really go into a little bit more specifics, copper, manganese, and zinc should be tested for. Even if you do it once to get a background level, those generally don't change much from year to year. But in this area, you're probably 50 to 60% deficient in all three of those trace minerals. Selenium, you're probably 90% deficient. There's no point analyzing for it because you know you're deficient. Cobalt and iodine, that was established in the early 1900s that they're deficient, 100% deficient. Now, if you're using some oddball feeds, there were some canola fields this year that were hailed out. You need to test for sulfur because sulfur levels can be high, and that relates back to problems with polio. Nitrate levels, especially on the hailed out crops or a frosted crop. And if you've put up your green feed or hay a little bit early and you can see that the bales have turned brown, they smell like tobacco, you get an enzymatic reaction called the Maillard reaction, which binds some of the protein to the fiber, and it's not available to the cow. So that test will go ahead and tell you what's the effective amount of protein I have or available protein in the ration or in the feed compared to a gross amount, which is the crude protein. Accuracy of analysis. The reason that you want to use a probe is if you take your samples by hand, you're always going to have a certain amount of that fine leaf material falling out of your hand before you can get it into the bale. And the easiest to see this is even if you go up to your bales this winter when you got some snow around and you reach in and just pull out some material, you'll find the leaves on the ground. It's very evident when it's on the snow. But if you use a grab sample, for example, protein levels of 10.5 versus 12.5 for core, if you're feeding a lactating cow, 12.5% is lots. The level I recommend is 11%. So in this case, if you were using a grab sample result, you'd be adding half a pound or 3/4 of a pound of canola meal, a pound of peas, or some other protein supplement that's not needed. It's an additional expense. On the energy side, 57 versus 63. A lactating cow needs 65% TDN. So if we back this off to a cow or let's use that lactating cow again, with a 57% TDN, you're probably looking at 8 or 9 pounds of grain to supplement to bring it up to where the energy levels will be met with that result. If you're at 63% TDN, you might be able to get 3-4 pounds of grain. So it could save you 10, 15, 20 cents a day just by not needing to put the extra grain into that ration. The wet chemistry analysis is the standard that has been used for years and years and years. There are companies out there that are saying, well, I can get it to you $10 cheaper and 2 days faster if I use near-infrared spectrometry or NIR. I've got no problem with NIR for the proteins and the fibers because what they do is they bounce a wavelength of light off of that feed sample after it's been ground, and when it's in the machine, what reflects back is tied, the light is tied to, the reflectance is tied to the organic molecules that are associated with those components. For the minerals, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, there's no organic molecule tied to that. There's no carbon tied to that. So you get a very erratic response, partly due to the formulas or the regression equations that they have. Some of them are not robust enough to handle all the information, and the reliability isn't there. So for example, calcium 0.45 versus 0.16, phosphorus 0.38 versus 0.2, magnesium 0.23 versus 0.13. If I was using the NIR results for a cow that was in late pregnancy, what I'd be looking at is I want my phosphorus to be a minimum of 0.2, magnesium to be a minimum of 0.2. So in that case, if I was using NIR, all I'd be adding is about 2 ounces of limestone. And you'd think you'd be fine. And if your nutritionist had the NIR results, that's what he'd do. Using the wet chemistry results, phosphorus levels are borderline, just where you need them to be. You add a little extra grain, that phosphorus level is going to come up. But you would need a minimum of 4 ounces of calcium and probably 1.5 ounces of magnesium to get the calcium phosphorus ratio at 2 to 1, so you get proper absorption of the nutrients, and the magnesium level at 0.2 to prevent downer cows and milk fevers. So having good sampling techniques, sending it away to the lab, and having them do the right tests makes a big difference in what you're going to need to do when you start feeding your cows. Nitrate concerns. This year we had some hailstorms, we had some droughts, there's been a number of light frosts. Sometimes a herbicide application occurs a little late in the season. Nitrates can cause real problems with reproductive efficiency, dead cows, lack of gain, lack of feed intake. But the trick is, I don't have a magic answer for you. I can't say this is the same thing that everybody has to do, because each situation is different. It depends on the weather conditions, how much fertilizer or manure was applied in that field over the last year or two. If it's been an area that's been used for swath grazing for the last 5 or 6 years, your nitrate levels can go through the roof as well. And the biggest thing is, how much is that crop growing? How much water did you get? How much of the nutrients has been used up by those plants by the time you have the problem? Nitrate levels peak about 4 days after a frost or after a light frost or a hailstorm. And what happens is, for oats and barley, wheat, all the annual cereals, there's no regulation of the amount of nitrate going up into the plant. So the roots are pushing up the water and the nutrients as much as they can, and the leaves cannot convert the nitrate into protein. So that's why you get the accumulation, about 4 days, maximum accumulation about 4 days after the storm or injury. If the plant recovers, everything goes back to normal. By 14 days after the storm or after the frost, everything's great. Everything should be back to normal. If it's a herbicide situation, you have to look at the label. You have to look at what's the safe feed, harvest interval. Different chemicals have different rates of impact on the plant. Some of them you can see the wilting and twisting about 4 days with the phenoxys. Some of the others take 2 weeks for the physical manifestations to occur. So it all depends what you have there. The biggest misconceptions, 2 big misconceptions I get with nitrates is people think that a killing frost is the problem. That's when you're going to get the nitrate accumulation. And that's backwards, because when you get that killing frost, Mother Nature basically throws a hand grenade into the plant. It destroys all the vascular tissues that moves nutrients up and down the stem, and you don't get nitrate accumulation. The other one is people say, my alfalfa got frosted, I'm going to have nitrates. It doesn't happen. Legumes are a different beast compared to annual crops. They've got the nodules in the root system. Nitrogen's fixed from the air, It stores as much nitrogen in the root system as they possibly can and only release the amount of nitrogen that's required by the plant on a daily basis. So think of the nodule as no different than a banker hoarding money. He only releases what he has to and keeps the rest in the vault. So you don't get nitrate accumulation on alfalfas. So we've got some of the problems figured out. What do we need to watch for? Now, how do we feed the animal? The rules of thumb that I use when I formulate rations is protein contents are 7, 9, and 11% on a dry matter basis for mid-pregnancy, late pregnancy, and after calving. And the energy contents go from 55 to 60 to 65% TDN. So in a year when feed is short and you're having troubles with knowing what to feed, always start using the low-quality forages first when the requirements of the cow are the lowest. If your cows are a little bit skinny, or if you're running short of feed and the calves are more than 150 days old, wean them. Your nutrient requirements of that cow drops 25% when she's dry compared to lactating. So you can get away with more slew hay, more chaff, more straw in the ration and still build her up before the cold weather hits. The straw grain rations, slew hay, chaff piles, use those first. When the energy and when the requirements are the lowest, cows in mid-pregnancy, mature bulls, they fit very well in that situation. Hailed out crops or late-seeded frozen crops, they're generally a little bit higher in quality, so use that second, and keep the high-quality forages, the good silages and the good quality hays for after calving, because that's when you need the highest quality feeds, and it pays you the biggest dividend. Now, one thing that you can look at when you are feeding some of these low-quality forages, especially the straw rations or the slew hay, is incorporating ionophore into the ration. It modifies the type of bacteria and the amount of bacteria that are present. Certain forms of gram-negative bacteria are reduced, and that'll increase the digestibility of the fibers, and you can get a 5 to 7% improvement in efficiency. It helps maintain a constant rumen function, so if you are feeding that 8 to 10 pounds of grain in a straw ration, you don't have as many problems with acidosis or grain overload. Bovotec can be fed free choice, Rumensin cannot. The other thing against Rumensin is it will kill dogs and it will kill horses if they get into the feed. So right now we did some numbers, and we found that for every dollar that you spend on an ionophore with these low-quality forages, you generally save $4 in feed expenses. Now, you can get these products in a mineral. You can put them into a 32% supplement or a 10% supplement. You can also buy pellets with low levels of rumensin, either 1,100 or 3,300 milligrams per kg from the feed mill, and mix it on farm. So there's a number of options, but the important thing is it has to be consistent intake. You can't forget about it for 2 days and then go back and feed it again. It just ruins the rumen environment. So starting from the lowest quality forage to what I consider to be the upper end of these unusual feedstuffs, what can we do and how can we use these? Cereal straw, great. Generally 4 or 5% protein, and you saw on the previous slide that you want a minimum of 7% protein in these rations, so it's a great filler. Half, for a mid-pregnancy cow, you can probably go up to about half of the ration being straw and then something else besides. It doesn't work for lactating cows or for young calf rations, just too low of a quality, too hard to digest. It takes too long to get through the system. Again, intake is limited by neutral detergent fiber. And the other side of the coin with this, with cereal straw, very low calcium, low magnesium levels. So you're not going to be able to use a 1-to-1 mineral or a 2-to-1 mineral. You're probably going to look at something that's either 3-to-1, say a 16.5, or a 20-7, a calcium phosphorus ratio, or even a feedlot mineral that's 22% calcium, 3% phosphorus. Because you're generally going to be feeding enough grain to bring your energy levels up that your phosphorus requirements are going to be met. Pea straw, 2 or 3% higher protein content than your general cereal straws. Energy contents are equal to or slightly less than oat straw, so it's not a bad feed. It's a good filler. It's got a lot more it has more calcium content in it because it is a legume crop. So the amount of limestone that you need to feed is going to be down. Limestone, magnesium are two products that are very dry and bitter to the taste. I worked in a feed mill for a year, and when as a nutritionist, and when the guys at the plant were sick or somebody didn't show up for work, they threw me into the mixing floor. And you get that limestone dust on your mouth, and it just sucks all the moisture out of it, and it's very chalky tasting, not very appealing at all. So if I don't like it, I don't think a cow would like it either. The big thing about pea straw is it is a bit different taste than cereal straw, so it might take 2 or 3 days for the cows to get onto it. But once they do start eating the feed, they'll clean it up. I've seen cows leave an alfalfa grass hay bale and go up to pea straw. So it's a good option, and when you can save 30-40% on the cost of your feed by supplementing in pea straw or some of these other feeds, it's economically sound to do so. The other one that's coming up in popularity is canola straw. Quality, someplace between cereal straw and pea straw. Again, cows have to get onto the taste of that stuff. Once they do get onto it, I've seen guys try to put canola straw out for a bedding pack. Next morning, there's no canola straw left. They've just cleaned it up completely. So it's a good filler again. The hollow stem in the canola straw, and generally by the time you bale it, it's deteriorated a certain amount. You don't want to put it through a bale processor because all you're going to have is dust. Bale processor and a straw chopper and a combine, to me, are exactly the same with this canola straw. There's going to be nothing for them to work with. It can be dusty or musty depending on harvest, so use it accordingly. If you find that it's very dusty or musty, roll it out instead of putting it into a bale feeder. Might reduce the problems with respiratory problems. Comparing the straws, generally very low in calcium, very low in calcium. When you're looking at the cereal straws, the phosphorus levels are fairly low as well. Magnesium is variable, and the TDN values are roughly 40 to 45%. So if you compare that to a hay will be roughly 58 to 62% TDN on an average quality hay. So it's going to need some supplementation otherwise. There's been guys that planted grass fields this year where they didn't get good germination and all they got was a bunch of weeds in those fields. Generally, it's good quality feed if it's cut early before it starts flowering and filling. As a precaution, limit the intake to 20 to 25% of the daily feed intake. And if these fields were treated with herbicides, you've got to observe the pre-harvest interval. You don't want to have any residual problems, especially if it's going into an animal that's going to be slaughtered within a week or 10 days. Depending on what weeds are present, you can run into some problems with oxalates, nitrates, alkaloids, photosensitivity. So if you can determine what type of weeds are present before you cut, and then look on the Canadian Poisonous Plant website that's available from Government of Canada, look up the weed, and then it'll tell you if there's going to be a problem with an oxalate or an alkaloid. You can graze stubble fields as well. It's good. The cows will definitely clean up the grain that's present in the unharvested fields. But if there's a pile of grain that was spilt off the truck, or the operator of the straight cut header or the swather operator, if he left a little patch that wasn't cut and harvested, they'll clean the grain off completely. That'll be the first thing they go to. It's like pie and ice cream for me. I like that over my vegetables. So you need to be careful. You don't want that problem to occur. you need a high calcium feedlot type mineral again, because the grain is high in phosphorus, the straw is high in, or medium in phosphorus, but both are short of calcium. So you don't want to have the troubles with the downer cows. Magnesium falls into that play as well. Watch for manure consistency. It's an indicator of how much protein is in the field or in the material that they're eating. If it's nice and flat and it forms a pie, you've got adequate amounts of protein. If you find that that manure is starting to pile up and have a more pyramid shape and lumpy shape, that's an indication that your protein levels are short. And when you're short of protein, your feed intake goes down, animal performance goes down. Slew hay, I've seen some stuff with results that are looking great, 8-9% protein. Other stuff is 3 and 4. So it all depends on what species are present and when it's being cut. Generally, the earlier you're cut, the better it is. With reed canary grass grazed early in the season or cut very early in the season, there is a possibility that some of the older reed canary grass varieties can have some alkaloids, and that will cause reproductive problems. Water hemlock, seaside arrowgrass are two weeds that traditionally like the wet conditions, and if they're consumed by the animals, especially with the water hemlock and the roots, if you instead of cutting it, the plant gets pulled out by the roots and the cows eat it, they'll die very quickly. It's a cyanide poisoning, so they've got about 15 steps before they're going to fall over. Hail damaged crops, extremely variable in quality. Some of them are great. Others, if there's nothing left, you're better off to leave it sit, wait for the regrowth, then cut when the regrowth's probably at the 5 to 6 leaf stage. Feed testing, definitely a high priority with this feed. If it was a heavily fertilized crop, especially the canolas, or if a guy's pushing for high protein wheat, your protein levels or nitrogen levels in the soil could be fairly high and cause problems. Inclusion, any place from 15 to 100% of the ration. Low soluble sugars, because the plants have been damaged, injured, or dead, the lower sugar levels could preclude that from being in sile, depending on how quick you get after the crop. So that's something to consider. And regrowth, if the fields are fenced off, you take your first cut, don't work the stubble. If you get a little bit of moisture, or if the soil moisture conditions are good, you could potentially either get a second crop or some late season grazing of very high quality forage. So if you've got thin cows and a hailed out crop, take your first cut or the damaged crop if you want, let it regrow. When it's at the 5 to 6 leaf stage this time of year and it's frozen, put the cows back in there and they'll gain 2-3 pounds a day. They'll do very, very well on that material. Last of the fun stuff, canola green feed or silage. There was a lot of canola cut for green feed and silage this year, especially as you went further east or further south. The highest qualities at late bloom to early pod stage. At that point, the quality is as high as a good quality first cut alfalfa grass hay, 14-16% protein, 60 to 63% TDN. The cows like this stuff. They'll eat it like crazy. Can be fed as a sole forage, but the concerns again is with nitrates. You need to test for sulfur so you don't have a polio problem. And if it's cut more mature, oil accumulates in the seed. So 3 weeks after pod set, if the plants are roughly halfway between pod set and full maturity, you could have 20% oil in that seed. And if you exceed 7% fat or 7% oil in a ration, the rumen contents get very slippery, and when the rumen turns, the material sits there like a lump of dough. And without the rotation, you get a reduction in digestive efficiency, and the gas bubbles produced by fermentation are trapped in the rumen. So you can actually get a bloat situation where the gases expand, put pressure on the lungs, and cause the cows to die. So be careful on how much oil you have in the ration as well. You've had a lot of guys seed their barley and some of their cereal crops mid-June, late June, first part of July. So we've got variable results for quality of barley this year. Some of it's down to 34 per pounds, 40 pounds. Some of it's, the early seeded stuff is really good. So back in the 80s, Gary Matheson at the University of Alberta went ahead and compared the different weights of barley from 34 to 51 pounds. And they fed it to backgrounding and finishing steers in a steam-rolled and dry-rolled barley situation. They had 10% alfalfa grass hay as the roughage source. So what they found was the lightweight barley had 9% less starch on a pound-for-pound basis. The fiber levels were up by about 2% for ADF and about 6 points higher for the NDF. Now, for a finishing ration, having a little bit extra fiber in there generally is not a bad thing. The digestion rates of the two different barleys, the lightweight barley was slower to digest initially for the first 2.5 hours, and after that it was about the same. So what they found was that if they put a steamroller to it versus a dry roll, the steamrolled was more susceptible to enzyme degradation, and you got that higher initial digestion rate. But, sounds confusing. At the end, there was no differences in starch digestion and finishing rations between the different bushel weighted barleys. They got the same rate of gain. Feed conversion and average daily gain, no difference between steam-rolled and dry-rolled. The carcass quality, yield, ribeye, fat depth was all the same. So the lightweight barley did just as well, down to a point. When you get below 42 pounds bushel weight, that's the break point. That's when you start seeing a reduction in performance. So for every pound below 42, you get a 1% reduction in efficiency. The reason that feedlots don't like the lightweight barley is if you're getting loads that are 52 pounds and 37 pounds, you set the rolls to manage the heavyweight barley so you don't get too many fines. The whole barley goes through, and at this stage in the finishing ration, you're probably losing 12%, 15% efficiency for the grain that is not processed. If you go ahead and set the rolls for the lightweight barley, you're overprocessing the big kernels, and you're going to have a lot more troubles with bloat. Subclinical acidosis, feeding tank is going to go down. So the advantage here that I can see is if you need 15 or 20,000 bushels of barley and you can source it at 42 pounds or the lower bushel weights, as long as it's a consistent product, readjust the rolls. Get your proper processing, and I think it's someplace around $5 to $6 a ton discount for every pound of bushel weight below 46 pounds right now. So if you're buying 42-pound barley, that could be $30 a ton in your pocket, and you'll still get the good efficiency out of it. So it's an option. If we're looking at unusual or byproduct feed ingredients, a couple things to consider before you bring the first load in. How consistent is that product? I've heard guys complain, I'm buying screening pellets from mill XYZ. The first load was nice. They got 32 tons on a Super B. It was okay. The next load, it's filled to the rafters, the tarp is bulging, and they only got 24 tons on the load. So variability in quality is something to consider. Can you get the loads of feed when you want it? For example, the canola processing plant in Lethbridge, they won't even sell it to a farmer, even by Super B now. It's all going out by rail. If you want to buy it, you got to buy it from the feed mill. Some of the other plants, you might be able to get it this week. 2 weeks from now, you can't get a supply. So that in and out, it's going to affect the digestive patterns, and the cows aren't going to like that. What's the cost of freight? You got to pencil that in. And then the other side of the coin is, how many of you guys have worked with distillers' grains? How tight is your collar when you're unloading that stuff?
A little dusty.
Yeah. that distiller's grain is extremely, extremely dusty and very scratchy. It will make you itch for what, 3 days? If you're not careful? So, creature comfort for the guy unloading the truck and working with it on a daily basis is something to consider as well. So, it's your decision either to use it or don't use it. So when we start looking at unusual ingredients, what we typically want to do is not rely on it 100% as part of the ration. Inclusion rates of 15 to 40%. Adaptation periods are generally needed with this stuff. It's no different than when you're buying a batch of feed. If you're using a complete ration, you don't wait until you're completely out before you introduce the new feed. Start 4 or 5 days before, 20%, 25%, mix it with the old stuff. And over the next 4, 5, 6 days, we work it up so that you're up to 50%, 75%, and the last 3 or 4 days until that old feed runs out, you're going at that 75-25 rate, and then when the old stuff is gone, switching to 100% isn't going to be a problem. Watch for signs of digestive upsets, feed refusal, sloppy manure. If you've got animals that just don't want to come up to the feed bunk, or if they're kicking at their sides, you know you've got a feed-related problem. The protein feeds, corn distillers, wheats, all these products, if you're using some of these lower quality forages, you're going to be supplementing protein. And generally, these products are cheaper than a commercial 32%. You got to know what the quality is, but the big problem with any of these distillers grains or byproduct feeds is your calcium levels are typically very low and your phosphorus levels are very high. So that's why they're typically only put in at 10, 15, 20% of the ration. It's cheap to feed limestone, $6 or $7 a bag, so it can be done, and it can be done effectively. So how do we calculate our best value if we're short of protein in ration? How do we calculate it out? So I took 2 examples, canola meal at $372 a ton and peas at $240 a ton. So what you want to do is look at the content of the protein, canola meal at 38%, peas at 24%, and work it backwards. What is the cost per pound of protein? So you multiply your protein content by 2204, or number of pounds per ton. For peas, you're getting 837 pounds. When you divide it out by the cost by the number of pounds, you're at 44 cents per pound of protein. Okay, that's the way it is. If you think that you're getting a great deal with peas because you're saving $130 a ton, field peas are only 24% protein. Working it backwards, you're at 45 cents a pound per pound of protein. So make that calculation before you actually put pen to contract and see what you can find for an option. For those that are really short of feed, you can look at limit feeding. This was an experiment done at the Ellerslie Research Station before it became houses. This was done back in 2002. Corn was a cheap source of energy compared to hay. And what they did was they fed hay at 0.5% of body weight. Typically, a cow will eat between 2.25% and 2.5% of body weight on a daily basis. So they underfed the amount of forage. They fed enough to keep that rumen functioning, and fed corn and a supplement to meet energy, protein, and micronutrient and vitamin requirements. So these cows were not getting their full 2.5% of body weight. They were hungry, but they made it through the winter in great shape. You can see some of the rations that they were using. 6 pounds of hay, a little bit of straw, barley grain or corn, the beef supplement. Early lactation, they increased the hay up to about 10 or 11 pounds a day instead of 30. 12 pounds of grain, so they're 10 pounds short of what they're eating. And then the limestone and the supplement. Limit fed rations. Oops, sorry about that, guys. You can see that with the grass hay, there was about a 50 to 60 cent differential in cost. Over 100 days, that's $50 a cow. These cows did very, very well on it. Last time they looked at this during the drought of 07, in 07 the feed prices were very low. Things were doing very well. We had a lot of feed, and you can see that the differential in cost was very minimal. So the limiting feed with the corn and the expensive hay was a way to reduce costs then, but in a good year, there was no advantage to doing that. Cows did well, feed costs were reduced. One thing or two things that they found to be very important is monitor body condition. Some cows, when they started losing a little bit of weight, they modified the ration a little bit, but that was only about 10% of the cows. And the important thing was protect them from the wind, provide bedding. If you don't provide bedding and cows are sleeping on the snow, they lose 25% of their energy, or their energy requirement to stay warm goes up 25%. The other side of the coin is the wind, same thing, that increases their energy requirements as well. So even if you look at a cow, or if you're feeding a normal herd and providing 10% additional feed over and above their daily requirements. So let's say they need 30 pounds and you're feeding 33 or 35. You'll still find that 10% of those cows will be skinny because they're more timid, or they don't have good teeth, or something's going on there that they're going to be in poorer shape. So with the lower amount of feed available, there was more competition for what was needed, so they had to really pay attention to the feed intake and the quality of the condition of the cows. Overwintered crops. Was there much around here that was left over winter and either combined this spring or baled up this spring? Okay, you guys were lucky. Most places, the cereal crop came through in reasonable shape. It was suitable for cattle. There was some energy and protein losses compared to the fall thrashed grains. What you have to watch out for with any kind of cereal grain is if you have red, blue, pink, or green molds, those are the ones that could potentially cause mycotoxins or create mycotoxins and give you problems with feeding. If you see them, feed it or test it before using. Wheat is a more rapidly digested cereal grain when it's cracked than barley. So feeding limits are about 6 pounds for cows and about 3 to 4 pounds for feeder calves. If you baled up the crop, typically what you're going to find is if it's a 1,500 pound bale of barley, you're going to get 750 pounds of grain and 750 pounds of straw. Wheat and oats are a little bit different, but you're going to have a lot of grain in this. Basic rations, how do we calculate out what we need and what we're going to be feeding? On a straw grain ration, mid-pregnancy, late pregnancy, you can read the numbers there. But what I'm doing here is calculating out if I've got a herd of 275 cows, I'm feeding them 75 days for mid-pregnancy. If I'm doing the 90 days for late pregnancy, those are the animal days that you're going to have to provide feed. After calving, 30 pounds of hay, no room for straw. Again, 60 days before they go out onto grass. The bulls, you're feeding number of bulls. Again, what are their feed requirements? So if we do all these requirements and figure out what's going on, you can either do it by pencil or with the Cow Bites program. It'll do all the calculations for you once you have the ration set up. You're going to need 1,000 bales of straw for 275 cows just for feeding, and probably about half as much again for bedding. Barley, 11,000 bushels, 38 tons of a 32% supplement to bring the protein levels up, and 360 bales of hay. So there's where the calculations come in. How many cows can I feed? When can I feed different feeds, or what combinations can I use to be effective? These numbers came off last year, so you're going to have to adjust it a little bit. But basically, if you're using the straw grain rations with the supplement and limiting your hay for after calving, your average feed costs were $684 a cow. If you're looking at feeding hay and hay only, averaging 40 pounds per head per day, and the hay costs are 11 cents a pound or $200 a ton. And that's basically what it is in southern Alberta right now. The differential in cost is $97,000 for 275 cows. So use the pencil and figure out what you can feed, when you can feed it, and minimize your costs. I'm going to kick into the side of trace mineral interactions and following up with a bit of what Mark was talking about. We get feed salesmen and companies out there that want to sell you magic product XYZ. You feed this and you're going to have no problems. Or you might hear, as Dr. Engstrom was saying, copper and zinc are important for hoof integrity. So somebody will want to say, well, I'll just throw extra copper or extra zinc into that ration. But if you find it, zinc is here. Copper, where the heck is it? But anyway, look at zinc. If you change the amount of zinc, what else are you affecting in that ration? So you need to take a balanced approach. There's no single element that's the silver bullet that'll solve your problem. Everything in moderation. So comparing minerals, product A versus product B. Looking at these two, I don't have any TIM cards. I'm a government employee. I can't afford them. They won't expense them. And my boss is here and she wouldn't expense those for me. But which is your better mineral? I want to see a show of hands. Which is better, product A or product B? Or am I missing a question before I can answer that?
Which one will the cow eat? That's always the problem.
Okay, big concern is, will the cow eat the product or not? Any other concern before we can decide what to use? What are you feeding? Are they getting an alfalfa grass hay ration or are they getting a straw grain ration? So that will make a big difference. So comparing these two depends on the ration. A 2-to-1 mineral might be good for a cereal grain feed, grass hay, grain straw ration, swath grazing, cereal silage, because your calcium levels are typically short in that type of feed. The 1-to-1 mineral is more for the alfalfa hay or a 50-50 mix, your canola green feed, alfalfa straw ration, because those have higher levels of calcium. So it depends. And even with these two minerals here, you might not get the proper calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium levels that you need to make these animals healthy. So you might need that 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 mineral. Or if you've got 2-to-1 mineral left at home, add a half a bag of limestone or a full bag of limestone to make it work. Nutrients supplied, you can expect with product A and product B, there's a difference in calcium and phosphorus. They look reasonable. Magnesium is the same. Your copper, manganese, and zinc are roughly copper and manganese are roughly the same. So it's not just what's on the tag, how much will they eat? Intake of 50 grams of product A gives you the same amount of magnesium, copper, and manganese. Intake of product B at 75 grams gives you a little bit more zinc and selenium. So use the Cowbites program, talk to your meal nutritionist, talk to your private consultant, or talk to me at the Ag Info Center. I can help walk through this kind of stuff. Trace minerals and vitamins. Copper, manganese, zinc, and selenium are definitely deficient in this area. Iodine and cobalt are non-existent. So, how many guys feed blue salt? Is that the only thing you feed? Okay, for those that, I'll modify this a little bit. If you're feeding a supplement with the blue salt, great. That means you're covering your bases. But the guys that are feeding only blue salt, what I suggest to them is put that salt up against the front of the box in the truck. Do it now when the weather's warm and you don't have to freeze your fingers. But leave it there. So when you get a snowstorm or some bad weather and you got a bunch of drifts to come home through after a night of curling or at the hockey rink, you're bucking those drifts with a little bit of weight in the back of your truck and you're not going to get stuck. And that's where those blocks should belong in most situations if you're only feeding blue salt, because changing from a blue salt on pasture to a fortified TM salt, you'll get roughly 25 to 30 pounds of higher weaning weight on the calves, just because you're using the trace mineral salt. Vitamins or precursors are oxidized 60 to 90 days after cutting or during the ensiling process. So if you cut your hay in June, by this time of the year, those levels are starting to go down. So supplementation is needed now, especially for the pregnant cows, because 6 to 8 weeks prior to calving, that's when the colostrum is being formed. The high vitamin E level is required to get into the colostrum, because the colostrum is the only way those calves will get vitamin E from the cow. It's not in the milk, it's in the colostrum. So if you don't feed your minerals and vitamins for a long enough period of time pre-calving, more navel ills, more scours, more pneumonias, more problems with weak calves. They don't want to suckle. It'll also impact your reproductive efficiency later down the road. Loose formulations in the winter are better than block. Having a cow go up to a block of salt and lick at it is no different than me going up to the John Deere tractor and licking the fender. Not much fun. Salt and mineral supplementation, loose is better than block. 75% of your salt consumption occurs at night. That was a study done at Lincoln, Nebraska, or University of Nebraska, Lincoln. What they found was cows don't like to sleep through the night. They get uncomfortable. They get up, they walk around. They're looking for something to do. If you've got a salt station at the bedding pack, they'll go over, eat some more salt. Life is good. Rough rule of thumb, 100 cows should consume a bag of salt a week. Mixing of salt and minerals is preferred. Cows crave the salt, they don't crave the mineral. So you don't have the mineral in one side of the feeder and the mineral in the other. That's probably one of the bad things that can happen. Injection supplementation. This is a product X that came out of the United States about 2 or 3 years ago. And what they say is for any place from $8 to $12 a cow per year, or based on the size of the animal, you either give them a 5 to a 7 1/4 milliliter injection. And their claim to fame is you either give them 2 or 4 doses a year, and the cost will run you any place from $5 to $13 a head. Now, here's the kicker. This is where the pencil comes out. What do you actually get for that $9 or $13 a head? The concentration of the trace minerals in this product are about as useful as tits on a boar. Very low. You'll get 150 milligrams of copper for the calves, 217 for the cow. So if you look at it, you can see that if you look at it on a daily basis, number of milligrams supplied over a year, you're only getting 0.41 milligrams per day for copper for the young calf, and they need 55. So basically, you've wasted your money. Be careful. We've got snakes oil salesmen out there. And just because they say it's great, doesn't mean it actually does a good thing. So buyer beware. Lick tubs, proteins, or blocks. This time of year when the grass is very short or low in quality, it matured earlier, the extra protein is typically what those cows need. If you've got no way to supplement with grain or hay, variable intake is a problem with anything free choice, be it mineral, vitamin, or lick tubs or blocks. You need to monitor what they're actually eating and what the costs are. Rob Hand did some work with free choice mineral consumption, salt and mineral consumption up in Westlock back in the late 80s. What he found was for a free choice product, and I think you can apply this to a tub or a block as well, is cows on average come once every 4 days to take the salt or mineral. and their intake can be any place from 1 gram up to 750 grams per day. Variable intake. Some cows didn't even come up. Same thing with these tubs. It may work, it may not. But the big thing is, I'm not going to go through the numbers with the percentages of each, but look at product 1, expected intake of 500 grams, the cost of 82 cents per day. Product 2, basically the same product, intake a pound a day, it's 450 grams instead of 500, and the cost was $1.44. That's a huge difference. So know your feed inventories, the quality of feed that you're providing, the types of animals that you're feeding, what you're supplied, match resources to what you've got. It's often cheaper to move the cows to the feed instead of the feed to the cows. Adjust the programs if they're thin. Make sure they're up to condition before the cold weather hits. Ask for help. Feed mill extension or feed mill nutritionists or feed salesmen, they can help you out. Private consultants, extension specialists can help with management and nutrition problems. Consider the options before you make a decision. Take an evening, sit down with a pencil and paper and figure out what you want to do. Any questions? I'll finish this one off. A young bull and an old bull are standing up on top of the hill. The young bull says to the old bull, "Look at those neighbors' heifers across the fence. Let's run down there and breed a few." And the old bull says, no, let's walk down there and breed them all. So anyway, they get to the fence. The young bull, being agile and nimble, he jumps over the fence and he goes over and starts courting with the heifers. The old bull, being a little bit arthritic and crippled up, he can't jump the fence, so he tries crawling through. About 3/4 of the way through, the barbed wire does his trick and removes his essential equipment. Now he's just a consultant. Anyway, we'll call it there. Andrea?